Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome back to Cross-Culture Understanding class with Miss Intan. In these sessions, we will learn about the culture and its elements in business context, part 1. In these sessions, the objectives of this class is that the students are able to understand the culture and elements, and the students are able to understand business context in cross-cultural countries. Have you ever visited another country? If you have, think for a minute about some of the differences you may have seen. Perhaps people dress differently or eat different types of foods. How did people get around? By car, by train, or by motorbike? Was there a particular religion that influenced how society worked? What language was spoken? And did you notice any forms of unspoken language? Your answers to these questions will give you some insight to the country's culture. So we'll be exploring cultural differences and their effect on business context in this session. Even if you haven't traveled to a foreign country, you can still see cultural differences within the US. Think about the concept of time, for example. How do people on the East Coast view time? You might have answered that East Coasters often see time as a valuable commodity that shouldn't be wasted. Now, compare that perspective to how someone from South might view time. Many Southerners still prefer a slower-paced way of life. How might this difference affect the way you would do business in each region? Just like you might adapt for differences at home, when doing business in foreign countries, you'll need to adapt as well. We say that companies must have cross-cultural literacy, or an understanding of how cultural differences across and within the nations can affect the way in which business is practiced. It is also important to consider how culture might affect the cost of doing business in particular locations. For example, some people argue that the Japanese traditions, including lifetime employment and long-term decision-making, lowered the cost of doing business in the countries during 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. So what is cross-cultural literacy? Cross-cultural literacy is an understanding of how cultural differences across and within the nations can affect the way in which business is practiced. And it is also important to success in international business. So there may be a relationship between culture and doing business in a country or regions, because culture is not static, it is dynamic. So, what is culture? The fundamental building blocks of culture are values or abstract ideas about what a group believes is good, right, and desirable, and norms or the social rules and guidelines that prescribe appropriate behavior in particular situations. You may not think what people now in so many countries wear blue jeans, drink cola and Starbucks coffee, eat Big Macs, and listen to Spotify. That cultural differences are still important. But you'd be wrong. Long-standing cultural differences still influence how business is being done. Think for a moment about opening case and how McDonald's had to adapt its traditional menu to meet the needs of India, where the cow is revered. Also, keep in mind that culture is dynamic. It is always changing. Just think for a moment of how cell phones have changed our culture and those of many others as an example. We call a group of people who share a common set of values and norms of society, and though we talk about the French culture and the Japanese culture and so on. So culture is not necessarily divided by the national boundaries. Some countries like Switzerland even have multiple distinct cultures. Similarly, some cultures transcend national boundaries. For example, you might think of how the values promoted by Islam influence many countries. So the question is, what is culture? So let me explain. Culture is a system of values or abstract ideas about what a group believes to be good, right, and desirable. And norms is the social rules and guidelines that prescribe appropriate behavior in particular situations that are shared among a group of people and that, when taken together, constitute a design for living. While values is the basic convictions or firmly held belief that people have regarding what is right and wrong and what is important and unimportant. Meanwhile, norms is the social rules that govern the actions of people toward one another and can be studied as folkways or traditional culture, the routine conventions of the everyday life. So let's look at the elements of a culture a little more closely. As we said, values are a fundamental building block of culture. They provide the context within which a society's norms are established and justified. Values can include things like a society's attitude towards individual freedom, loyalty, collective responsibility, marriage, and so on. Values also reflect the political and economic systems of a society. So, for example, the free market system in the US shows that individual freedom is valued. The social rules that govern people's actions toward one another are called norms. You can think of norms as being either folkways or mores. Folkways are the routine conventions of everyday life like dress codes, social manners, and neighborly behavior. Usually, violations of folkways are not a serious matter, but can have a negative effect on business. For example, earlier we mentioned the need to adapt to how people view the concept of time. If we consider time from an international perspective, we can think in general terms of people from countries like those in Northern Europe or the US placing a value on time. People from these countries often think of it as a commodity that can be wasted or saved. In contrast, people from Arab or Latin cultures have a much looser concept of time and don't worry if they are late for appointments or things take longer than originally expected. So, imagine a meeting between a manager from Germany and a manager from Saudi Arabia. If the manager from Germany is kept waiting by the Saudi manager, the German manager might feel slighted, yet the Saudi manager would have no idea why. However, if the managers were aware of the different perspective of time, the German manager might be more tolerant of the Saudi manager, and the Saudi manager might make a bigger effort to be on time to the meeting. While rituals are also folkways, so take the process of exchanging business cards for example. The way a Japanese business manager presents his card will provide information on his rank. The deeper the bow when the card is presented, the greater the respect the manager is showing you. So when you receive the card, you can show your respect by examining the card carefully and bowing in the return and presenting your own card. Contrast this to how cards are exchanged in the US. Mores are the forms that are central to the functionings of a society and to its social life. Mores may actually become laws. So, we have law against theft and incest. As you probably guessed, mores are much more significant than folkways, and violating them usually brings serious retributions. Keep in mind, though, that what might be acceptable in one country may be forbidden in another country. So, while drinking alcohol is acceptable in Denmark, in Saudi Arabia, it is not. Now let's talk about the culture and its relationship with society and the nation state. As we said earlier, a society is a group of people that share a common set of values and norms. In other words, it's a group bound together by a common culture. Remember though that nation-states are political creations and so they can contain more than one culture like India and Switzerland do. Keep in mind that a country can also have a different societies and that each society can have its own culture. We mentioned earlier the differences within the US. So, society is a group of people who share a common set of values and norms. There is not a strict one-to-one correspondence between a society and a nation-state. Meanwhile, nation-states are political creations that can contain a single culture or several cultures, and some cultures embrace several nations. So this is the picture of the determinants culture. So there are several parts of culture, norms, and value systems. First is the religion, second one is the political philosophy, the third one is economic philosophy, and then education, language, and social structure. So customs means common or established practice. Meanwhile, manners means behaviors regarded as appropriate in a particular society. And a society's social structure is its basic social organizations. Two dimensions of to consider are the degree to which the basic unit of social organizations is the individual as opposed to the group. And then the second one is the degree to which a society is formed into classes or castes. And group here, group is an association of two or more individuals who have a shared sense of identity and who interact with each other in instructed ways on the basis of a common set of expectations about each other's behaviors. Groups are common in many Asian societies, meanwhile in many Western countries emphasize the individual. Think about your favorite sports team for a minute. You probably know its record and many of players, and you can probably tell me a lot about a few stars. What does this tell you about this particular group? In many Western societies, there is a strong focus on the individual and the individual achievements. How does this affect business? Well, it can be both beneficial and harmful. On one hand, the focus on individual achievements leads to a high degree of entrepreneurship, which is beneficial because it's linked to the development of new products and processes. On the other hand, the focus on individual also leads to a lot of managerial mobility, and so there is a lack of loyalty and commitment to individual firms, and there is a competition between individuals within a firm rather than team building for the sake of the organizations. You probably experienced some of these issues yourself. In contrast, many Asian societies focus on the group as the primary form of social organizations. So, rather than looking at the individual achievements of a Japanese manager, you might look at the standing of the group that he belongs to. In fact, rather than identifying themselves by the job they do, for example, marketing manager, Japanese businessmen often identify themselves as belonging to a particular company, so they might say they belong to Sony or Toyota. You've probably heard of the lifetime employment system that is often associated with Japanese companies that reflects this commitment. From a business perspective, this means that there is a strong incentive to work together for the common good, rather than focus on individual achievements. Many experts believe that this cooperative atmosphere has been central to Japanese success. So, is the group emphasis always better? Not necessarily. Just like societies that emphasize the individual, there are drawbacks from emphasizing the group. One drawback in Japan, for example, is a lack of incentive for individual creativity and initiative, and consequently entrepreneurial activity. In societies where the individual is emphasized, the individual achievement and entrepreneurships are promoted, but this can encourage job switching, competition between individuals in the company rather than team building, and a lack of loyalty to the firm. In societies where the group is emphasized, the cooperations and teamwork are encouraged and lifetime employment is common, but individual initiative and creativity may be suppressed. All societies are stratified on a hierarchical basis into social, categorical, or social strata, usually defined by characteristics such as family background, occupations, and income. Societies differ in terms of the degree of mobility between social strata, the significance attached to social strata in a business context. Suppose you don't like your lot in life, can you move? We use the term social mobility to refer to the extent to which individuals can move out of the strata into which they are born. How easy it is to move depends on the society. The most rigid type of society is the caste system, where a person's social position is determined by the family and change it's virtually impossible. So if you're born into a family of shoemakers, you can more or less count on being a shoemaker yourself. India is probably the best modern example of how a caste system works. There are 4 main castes, and even though it was officially abolished in 1949, its influence still remains today, particularly in rural areas. You can learn more about India's caste system in the countries focused in your text. The class system that exists in countries like the US is a much less rigid system of stratifications. You probably know stories of immigrants coming to the US with only the clothes on their backs and managing to work with their way up to the top of the social hierarchy. In the class system, mobility is possible either through luck or personal achievement. Okay, this is the end of our session today. See you on part 2 of the culture and elements on the business context. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.